to welcome you to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I am your host, Christian Ace Stettler, and as you can see, I am back in my office in Fairbanks, Alaska. Fortunately, it's warming up here. It's pretty much light all the time. That sun is beaming before I wake up at 6 a.m., and last night I was outside at midnight, and the sun is definitely down, but you can still see some light off in the distance. So we are most definitely headed towards those 24 hours of daylight. But anyways, we just got back from a trip to Hawaii with the family. We went to Kauai and over to Oahu and Honolulu. And while we were over there, I recorded a podcast with my wife, Alicia, and we had a great time talking story. As you can see, Diamond Head and Kapiolani Park in the background. We were staying just off Kaimana Beach, if you're familiar with the area. Anyways, we had a fantastic time. It was a glorious holiday vacation for me and my family in the islands of Hawaii, and it kind of felt like going back home to a degree. But anyways, home is in Alaska right now, and that's where we're at. And I'm happy to introduce this episode to you. If you don't know, Alicia, my wife, she's a licensed clinical therapist for, they call it SEARCH here, the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Corporation, I think, SEARCH. Anyways, she's a clinical therapist over there, and she has been working on what she calls revolutionary yoga and a concept of the circle of the self. And we don't get too deep into all that in this episode, but we talk story about a number of things, some incidents, some experiences we had in Hawaii. We take a lot of calls, a lot of audience participation. And I just want to give a big shout out to Alicia, my wife. Thanks for participating on the episode with me. We are going to take over the social work world together. Step by step, we're making that path as we walk it. Anyways, I am getting carried away. I would like to introduce episode number 49 with Alicia Stettler. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Let's get this conscious party started for real. Hey, yo, everyone, gather around. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and a Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Well, we're live with another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I believe this is episode 49, so one more to get to 50. And we are broadcasting live with a very special episode from Honolulu, Hawaii. And I'm here with my beautiful and wonderful wife, who's also an incredible social worker, Alicia. How's it, Alicia?
How's it? Loving being in Hawaii, and it's a great interview on the podcast, so thank you.
Yeah. And I always say it feels a little bit weird talking to somebody next to you and looking to them on the screen and hearing into the headphones, but we do our best. All right. Well, you said, let's see. Let's start off. Who are you? Where'd you come from?
Ooh, okay. Well, I am an ever-evolving human, and I've come to recognize that more and more lately. But I am originally from the UK, the Isle of Man. I was born, and then I moved to the Channel Islands, Guernsey, which is just off the coast of France. So my accent, I think it comes out more and more if I'm talking on a podcast. It comes out my British accent. So from the UK originally, and then I moved to America for my master's program where I met Christian for my master's in social work. So I've been working in social work post-master's since, when did we graduate? 2016. And I've had a pretty diverse social work background. So worked in juvenile justice, worked in medical social work, so in dialysis, nephrology, in private practice. I've worked with foster families and children, and right now I am clinical supervisor at an outpatient behavioral health clinic. So I've been all over in the social work field. But it's really brought me, I appreciate the diversity I've had because now I've come to a conclusion of how I really want to practice social work. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But I'm also a certified yoga teacher. So that really, it pushed me past my boundaries of like traditional social work practices. And it's brought me to a state where I blend a lot of those yogic philosophies with traditional clinical practices. Um, and that's how I work with my clients, but also the people I supervise, and just generally in the world. I think I use all of those practices as a human. So yeah, I'm excited to get into all of that. And of course, I'm a mum of wonderful 3 children.
Well,
Together.
and made an afterthought.
No.
All right. Well, I think it's best we talked about a little bit about where you came from. It was really quick, but let's talk about where we're at right now. We've been in Hawaii for I don't know, a little over a week now, and we met here in Honolulu. How's it coming back?
It's amazing. And I think I said to you before, I feel so grounded coming back here. Um, there's a lot of memories, of course, with our relationship, but also I'm born and raised on islands. So in the UK, the Isle of Man, Guernsey, very different to Hawaii, but I'm born and raised on islands around the ocean. I grew up as a swimmer. And so being here back close to the ocean and in the ocean and on the Aina here it's so grounding for me. And then we've been going kind of back and forth to like our old homes and places we used to go eat, and it's great to be back and experience that all again. And as we're so different, like I said, we're constantly evolving, and so coming back as the humans we are now to the places we used to be, we see them through different eyes, and with our kids too, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like coming back to a place as a new person with new eyes. And I felt the same way about going back to Fairbanks, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I got to see it. I'm seeing it in the present with new eyes. But yeah, let's see. We got some comments in the chat. I meant to mention this. This episode is completely open. So if you would like to call in, use the call-in feature and join us at any time to talk about anything that we're talking about, or if you want to contribute in any way, feel free to use the call-in feature, and you can also use the chat, as folks are also doing. Looks like we got Nico's mom stays in Hawaii, and his mother-in-law's visiting Hawaii right now. Well, maybe we gotta get a party.
Yeah.
And Jazz says, I hope you two are enjoying Hawaii. Hopefully the snow will be mostly gone once you return to Fairbanks. I disagree,
He
Jazz.
doesn't want that.
I want to be there when it melts, when the breakup. That was one of my most meaningful experiences to take it back to Fairbanks was my senior year of my BSW. I'd done most of my BSW remotely, besides being a part of like the rural cohort, but they would fly me in and whatnot. But the final year, in order to make practicum work, I moved to Fairbanks, and I watched a buddy of mine's house during the breakup season when he went to visit his wife in Australia, who's visiting her family in Australia. And I got to walk. He had this old dog named Doge, and he was like on his last legs, so really old. But watching him, I got to walk down the Chena River like every day, and we'd watch the river break up more and more every day. And there were like beavers, we saw moose, and it was just a great time for me. It was a great experience. So I don't want to miss that this year. I think it's probably too late to put in for that. What is it? The
Oh,
Banana Classic. But
yeah.
maybe it's too late. I don't know.
We'll have to make our own bets.
Well, anyways, I hope that the snow is still there when we get back, so that we can view the breakup. I'm a little bit worried about, the birds and the squirrel that I made friends with. They're probably wondering where the food is at, but hopefully they'll be patient enough and not try to do a break in and get all the seeds that are
We
stacked.
had to stash the seeds. Hopefully there's like a whole welcome party when we get back with the birds and the squirrel.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, what do you want to talk about, Alicia?
What do I
Well,
want?
it's you. How about this? Let me ask you this. We talked about just to center so everyone knows what's going on. We talked about where you came from a little bit, but where are you at now?
Where am I now? In terms of social work?
Yeah, mostly you talked about, your background, how you got here, but you're a licensed clinical social worker now. Maybe you could talk about that path maybe you could talk about that a little bit. You graduated with your MSW and talk about your path to becoming an LCSW and to now where you're in a supervisory role, because I think a lot of people, that's going to be a lot of social work students, that's what they want to be, as therapists, and eventually, you know, you want to be able to influence others and whatnot as a leader or a supervisor or something along those lines, supervision.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, um, my master's program, I went to Hawaii Pacific University, and it's a generalist program. So there wasn't a specific mental health track, but I knew I wanted to do therapy. So my practicums were I was working with youth gangs in Hawaii, and I also did some medical social work and some social work in education, special education. So I got a pretty well-rounded experience there. My favorite one, my practicum when I was working with the youth gangs in the high school was it really pushed me past my boundaries, and so I learned a lot from that from my supervisor Mo, who unfortunately passed away. But he taught me a lot about how to just work with people organically, you know, and not. There's so many standardized practices and tools and ways of doing things and systems, but he was very much like, let's just be with these kids, talk to them, just have positive experiences. And we were working with the gangs as a whole rather than pulling people out individually. So it was just a great experience. And I think that did set a foundation for kind of how I wanted to practice social work. But after that, my master's program.
Can I stop you real quick?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit because you mentioned Mo, and I think Mo's a good point for like. I think as a social worker, you're gonna have a lot of oh shit moments where you're like, you know, maybe I was thinking about it all wrong. I was convinced that I was right about this, but maybe I was wrong. And so, like, I just want to back up a little bit. I came up in social work before ever getting any education as working with juveniles in a treatment facility, and I loved that job. But when I look back on it, we did a lot of things that I wouldn't like today. But anyways, what made it good, what made me a good employee and supervisor at the treatment facility was that, you know, like I treated the kids with respect, with mutual respect. Like I never had all these people, staff and stuff, always had problems with the kids getting hit and assaulted and spit on and all these things and you know, bad words and whatever. And I never had that, not really. And the reason that I was good at that was because I was able to meet them where they were at, and I was able to treat them with respect. And I feel like I saw them in a way that the other staff, many, not all of them, but many of the other staff didn't. And then I went on to I moved to Alaska, lived in Barrow, Utqiagvik for several years, and got my on the way to get my or I got my BSW and ended up in Hawaii. I was dating Alicia. We went to a Christmas party.
Yeah.
A Christmas party, and I was talking to Mo, this big Tongan guy, and we were talking, and I think he'd been drinking. And I was telling him about like all the stuff I'd learned in graduate school and talking about boundaries and you got to do this and do that. And he's like, oh, I'm going to stop you right there, brother. You got to throw all that shit out the window if you want to be able to work with the kids that I work with. And he just talked about like just keeping it real. And I was like, wow, you know, here I am in grad school, you know, thinking that I learned everything. But really what I did was I forgot what made me a good social worker to start with.
Yeah.
And so did you get that same sense of like, that was, I mean, like an oh shit moment, like, you know, I thought I was learning and growing, and maybe I was, but I needed Mo to intervene and to tell me that night. So I could say to myself, what? You know, I can't believe I can't believe me of all people got away from that.
Right. And I think I needed Mo for a different reason though, because I was very much like, you know, a student, wanted to do things by the books, you know, and like learn all the things. And he kind of unpacked that for me, whereas you already had that, you know, and so it was special to be able, he threw me it completely. Like there was no, we're going to do this training, we're going to do some onboarding. Like there was none of that. It was just, okay, hop in the van. Our supervision was always in the van on the way back from our groups in the high school. It was hop in the van. He was like, okay, what are you going to do today? And I'm like, I don't know. And then he would just be like, hey, you're leading the group today. And it was just these kids. And right now, I still have a baby face. And so think about how many years ago was that? 9 years ago? Throw me in with these high school kids. I looked like a high school kid myself. And so for them to take me seriously, I had to, you know, just follow his lead of just being with the kids and having fun with the kids and doing things that, you know, push me out of my comfort zone, but I had those connections. And it was like sense of humor was a big thing that he pulled out of me as well. And like I say, the supervision was back in the van. We'd get back in the van. He'd be like, what were you thinking about when you did that? It was, and he would really call me out on it, and I would have to answer him like, okay, so next time I won't do that. He was like, no, really good job on this. And he was also really good at finding our strengths as well. Because I remember in a meeting we had one time, and the kids were completely out of control. And so the person I was working with wasn't Mo that day. She got super upset and she just walked out of the group. And so I was just left there in the group, and I was just like, yo, like what the hell was that about? Like, her name was Saber, but what was she respects you guys so much, and what are you doing? And they were all like just kind of stopped in their tracks. And he just brought that to the group, and I really appreciated that he recognized that was a positive thing that I did. I was just, I stayed with them, but I called them out.
Some people think when you work with kids, especially at first, they're afraid that the kids are going to react if you're honest with them. But my experience with kids is like what you're saying
Opposite.
is if you shoot them straight and tell them what it is, they view that as being respectful. And I never had a problem with that.
Yeah. And I just don't think I would be the social worker I am today without having that experience. So yeah, it taught me so much. And that supervision as well. I'll just say that being a supervisor now, it also teaches me not to just follow the system blindly, to let people, practice and fail and learn from their mistakes, and never to just, what's the word? Just to say, you did this wrong, do it this way, but to be like, hey, what was that about? Like, how could you do this different? And I think I try and pull the spirit of Mo into my supervision as well.
Another thing that you had me thinking of, it actually makes me like tear up a little bit. I don't know, my eyes water up a little bit thinking about the kids that I work with. And I didn't know the kids that you worked with, but I heard obviously stories and everything. And I think you come across these kids that we work with. Sometimes people could come across them and they could be so rugged and harsh and inappropriate would be another thing. All sorts of things. And it could offend people in all sorts of ways. You say, this is young punk or this whatever. And then you get to know these kids and you learn where they came from and the shit that they've already dealt with and that they're dealing with now. And I mean, that's another like, oh shit moment when you sometimes come to those, when you learn those, I don't know, when you have those aha moments, when you're working with kids and you're like, wow, you've had a really rough time, and I can see exactly why, you behave the way that you do and you feel the way that you do. And I think that's, those are the moments that I've really felt genuinely like a social worker.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. For sure. And that goes back to everything. Even now when I'm working with the clinicians and they're noticing like, oh, this person is so narcissistic. And I always pull it back to think about why they have these narcissistic tendencies. And if you follow it back, I would say 100% of the time, there's trauma there. There's a reason that they developed these, survival skills, protection, there's armor, and the behaviors that they're now inflicting on other people are obviously unreasonable, inappropriate, and there's no excuse for it. But you can track it back to trauma, and then you'll be able to help them. Because if you just say, like, this is bad, and pathologize it and say, okay, with the DSM-5, I'm putting narcissistic personality disorder on you. I just don't think we get anywhere. We have to trace it back and find what is the traumatic root there. It could be big T, little t trauma, but there's something there that they need to help heal within them, and they can, work on those behaviors themselves. But same with the kids. It's what Mo was teaching was redirectional. We were redirectional specialists, and so it was meeting them where they're at, but helping them with, talking about the real crap that they've been going through, and then thinking, okay, how are you responding to it? Let's redirect the energy into it, something positive. And these kids, like, I got to be with a senior class, and they were going off to college, they were going into the military, like they had these big plans. And I don't think I would have had that without Mo, without the program. So it was, amazing experience.
Yeah, it makes me think, just before we move on, it makes me think of the one thing I believe in both of these things as a human being and especially as a social worker. But, when you look at somebody, it can be easy to miss the burdens that someone might carry and judge them or think this or about this or that about them or jump to conclusions. But we never know the burdens that folks are carrying, including ourselves, and that's why
Yeah.
I hope that I show that in, as a professor, as a teacher, when I try to do the very best I can to be empathetic, and when someone has a problem, whether it's medical or life just gets in the way or whatever, or even if they're just having a hard time, I try to look at it as, um, the best way is to find a path forward together. And I've never understood I used to hate that as a student, and it used to really intimidate me both, like as a kid and as an adult, like when it's really strict and you're worried about like, meeting every requirement exactly the way that you're supposed to. But I've learned that we're all individual human beings, and we all carry different burdens and have different things going on. And it's often hard to understand and see what someone else is going through. And so we got to be able willing to listen to those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have some stuff to catch up on the chat a little bit. Let's see. Jazz talked about the swimming in the ocean. That's been probably one of the most therapeutic things for me. We're here at the beach that I used to bring the kids to every day when they were very little. And I actually went through the pandemic here, and Hawaii was completely shut down for like a long time. You weren't allowed to go in the parks, but you were allowed to traverse the parks to go to the ocean. So we had the ocean without all the tourists for like a year. It was pretty cool. And so anyways, just being here and being able to get in and being away from the sun in Fairbanks, there's a beauty to the Arctic, but it is, it's a challenge to get through the times when it's dark and cold and you're not getting the vitamin D from the sun, you're not getting it in your eyes, you're looking at the computer, you're in the dark. And so it's been truly a blessing and a pleasure for this glorious trip to Hawaii. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah. And it's true what Jazz said about with movement and healing for mental health. It's the ocean. Zayda, our oldest, our boy, was saying, Mom, can you feel the push and the pull of the ocean? And it's so true. Just like going with the flow of that ocean is so healing for our bodies. It's relaxing for our nervous system as well. If you ever heard me talk, I always talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, because triggering that is what keeps us grounded and relaxed. And being in the ocean and just kind of flowing with that push and pull is incredibly grounding and stimulates that vagus nerve. So yeah, Jazz, you're right. It is healing. And I think we'll probably talk about movement more a little bit later.
And I hope to hear more about your your experience that you mentioned in the chat, Simone. And, yeah, thank you for the comments about that, Chaz. And then Monique says, psychology and the adolescent brain, it is tough differentiating what is a normal part of development versus psychiatric.
And that is so true. And that's something I've been working with. One of my interns I have right now is don't get caught into pathologizing everything, because there's so much that it may be developmentally appropriate, but it also just may not need to be pathologized. We don't have to put a DSM diagnosis on everything, and I think that a lot of systems encourage us to do that, and it's just not. I just don't think it's appropriate, and I don't think it's healing either. So
well said. All right, well, like I said, I want to reiterate that the phone lines are open. So if you have something you want to talk to us about, then go ahead and call in. And Charlotte, let's take your call.
Hi, good afternoon.
Let me go over a little bit.
I have really
We can't hear you, Charlotte. Oh, wait, hold on a second.
it may be our side.
That's me, Joe.
Can you say something in the phone?
yes, can you hear me?
You can. I said like really.
I know it was
It
hard
was
to
hard
hear
to-
you all as well, kind of. So let me.
Oh, it's hard to hear her.
It was a little bit.
It's like
Let me try this.
maybe I'm gonna funny.
Can you
Can you hear me
better?
better?
No.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear what you're saying.
Okay. So I'm
I'm a little chilly right now. I've been to Hawaii.
I always wanted to go, and so I'm so glad the two of you are able to be back there enjoying your space together. So my question, first of all, I'm Charlotte Huckabee. I'm the Director of Elder Services at the Copper River Native Association. And one thing, that I deal with is obviously staff with trauma, right? And so a question I have that you were speaking, you were really focusing on kids, but I feel like it focuses on everybody, right? But how do you get yourself to focus on the why instead of the situation at hand? And the reason I ask this is because to help my people understand too, right? Like what do you really how do you dig deep and really realize that the people are coming from trauma, right? And focus on that instead of focusing on what they're doing right at this given moment that's upsetting you.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay now?
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Really good question. And I think I always go back to one, we need to know how our energy is in that moment, and we have that responsibility. I talk about regulating the breath all the time, and to the people I work with too. When you have someone who's, dysregulated, regulate that energy. And then, yeah, it's just always going back to that why, because that person in front of you, you really don't know what's happened in their day, in their week, in their life. Um, and so always, once you've taken that step back and you regulated yourself, is just remembering that everybody has their own story, and to listen, number one, to listen, because underneath it could be the anger, the yelling, underneath that, there's probably what if it's an inner child that's upset, if it's an adult, or just, it's triggered something. And so just to listen, just to be there, because a lot of people also, whether it's staff or clients we're working with, will they will be triggered. But once they're listened to, if you just sit there, listen, regulate your own breath, naturally, organically, they're able to kind of regulate themselves a little bit, and then you can get to the why. Whereas if we just go straight in that, first and foremost, we're reacting to the situation, somebody else's elevated status or dysregulated emotion, we're never going to get to that why. So I would say just regulating our own energy, being able to listen first and foremost, and then just reminding ourselves and everybody that we're working with that everybody has a story. We don't need to understand the story, but we should hear the story. And then there may be just a little bit more understanding that once we've heard the story. But yeah, it can be hard. It can be really hard, especially if we're burnt out, right? And we've had our own things to deal with. And, someone comes with us, like a staff comes, and they really irritated about something. It can trigger our own emotions. And that's why I always say regulate yourself first. Yeah, I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Absolutely perfect answer. Thank you. Thank
You're
you,
so
though.
welcome.
It helps me to understand too, because I've been in management for years, but this is the first job that I've actually, and I've been here in this position for going on 5 years now, but it's the first job that I've really dealt with the staff that has really experienced some trauma, and so, and then having to kind of be mediator too, right, between staff that have that are dealing with that or have dealt with it and that type of thing. And so, and then being able to share with staff, like just what you said, your own energy, and making
Yeah,
sure that you understand that they have a story too, and that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
of course. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Charlotte. It's good to see you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Let's talk about a couple of our experiences here in Hawaii. I've been dying to talk about them with somebody. I think, and I truly believe in this. Sometimes we have experiences, we can enter into a conflict or we can have something that happened and we don't talk about it, and it just kind of eats us up inside. And it's something that this is something that I've always, debated about with myself, is like, when do you step in if you see something that bothers you? Like, let's say you see somebody verbally abusing their partner or wife or female at a restaurant or something, or physical aggression, or let's say like a police officer, like choking someone out or anything like that. Like when is the right time to step in? And then we talk about anti-racism oftentimes in critical and revolutionary social work. And, oftentimes, like if you would follow some people, they would say that you should be calling everyone out. And I don't know that I agree with that. I think that, to each their own, what you think is appropriate. But I think you have to pick your battles somewhat, or else you'll be fighting all the time. Because there's a lot of bad people doing a lot of bad stuff all over the world. And, you think about like the bystander thing, like if it's in the country, they usually help you out, but they say in the city, people would just walk by. Well, we've been kind of in the city the last couple of weeks, even though in Kauai it was still a little bit of a city atmosphere with the tourism.
Right.
And we had a couple incidents where I felt like I was debating with myself whether I should step in or not. And one of these incidences was at, we were at near Shipwreck Beach down on the south shores of Kauai. And there's lots of Hawaiian monk seals that come up and turtles and whatnot that come up there. And there was a Hawaiian monk seal and its child sleeping on the beach. And there was a tourist that came up and was having his partner take pictures of him right next to the seal. And you could tell she was very uncomfortable and was like telling him to stop. And that made him more of like what I would say a clown. And like he was like, taunting the seal and like, oh, look.
And he was so close. That was what was bothering me. He was right up in the face, like the seal's face. It was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, and if you talk about natural consequences, the natural consequence for that should have been that seal should have turned around and bit him in the ass. But anyways, I felt like I should have said something or did something, because there's lots of people there, and you could tell people were like, oh, should I do something? But most of these people probably haven't, because it's a tourist place, so most of the people there probably, don't have that much of a connection to Hawaii or unfamiliar with what you're supposed to do. And I mean, there was even cones, you weren't supposed to go past the cones, and
right.
The dude was still going past the cones. But so there was people like looking. I could tell like he was making them uncomfortable. But I should have did something. I should have said something and taken some pictures of him or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly. Don't necessarily believe in like outing someone on social media or something like that. But at the same time, it's completely inappropriate to go to some other land somewhere, and there's a protected species that they put cones around so you don't bother them, and you go up and you intentionally try to aggravate them just so you could get a picture and like probably trying to impress his girlfriend, who I don't think was impressed. I think she was.
I don't know. I saw her taking photos pretty close too, but I think for me, because I don't like conflict at all, I'm very much focused on peace over war, love over hate, and but when he walked away, I was really upset with myself that I didn't say something in a way of just, hey, do you realize that we're supposed to give these seals space because, they came up here, they're exhausted, they're coming up here to rest. We're on their land. I mean, they built this massive hotel right on the beach where the seals have beached for decades, centuries. And so just to let him know, in case he didn't know.
He knew he was being a clown. There's pictures, there's cones around it that say, don't go through the cones.
I know. But yeah, I just don't like the conflict. And so I wanted to go more from like a peaceful way. But I just didn't even do that. So, but it taught me. It was a lesson because next time I would.
And I'm the complete other side, right? I mean, I believe in peace. I want peace too, with everything. That's my end game. But when I get going, I can be not kind of peaceful, and I could go off on somebody. And so I think in a situation like that, I also worry about myself, like taking it too far. I'm not saying I like putting my hands on somebody or something like that. I'm just saying like when I get going, and if you talk back, I'd have let him know what I thought, and it wouldn't have been good. And I also think, my children are there. Do I want to hear them?
Right.
Well, on one side, do I want them to see their father sticking up for what's right? Yeah. But on the other hand, do I want them to see that side of me? Not really.
Well, and then I'll go back to, then we have to regulate ourselves first before we go into that situation, right? Like, I know that you often practice regulating your breath before you say something or you go into a situation, right? And I think that's important because if you didn't do that, you're going to be in that fight, flight, or freeze, and you're going to have less control over what you say and do. Whereas if you're in that, relaxed state, you're going to be able to respond differently. So it's all of these things that I think are really important for me in social work and therapy are just important for us as human beings, in the world. But I wish next time, I know we would both say something. I hope in a peaceful way.
Yeah, and I think about it like when I look at it in hindsight, you know what I could have did? I could have pretended like I was a worker or something like that and just like ushered him away, you know, and I think that's a tactic that's used with, I think it's called the Green Dot program, like domestic violence prevention. And it's like teaches you like if you're a bystander, you know, and you see something, just maybe not directly intervene, but to distract them in some way. Drop a bottle and break it or something, or does that make sense? Or like ask them a question or something.
Yeah.
But like maybe I could have got him away and said like, look, you know, I have to call the police if you don't leave right now.
Right.
Or something like that, and he would have left, and then I avoided a conflict.
Right.
Okay, so then let's go like yesterday. We're on the other island on Oahu right now. We're just outside of Waikiki. And for those of you familiar with the area, I'm like over by I was walking over by the Waikiki Aquarium, just walking towards Waikiki, and I saw these local guys, and I don't know exactly what ethnicity they were, but they were either Native Hawaiian or Micronesian or a mixture of both. And my first thought when I walked by them was like, these guys are having so much fun. I haven't laughed like that in a while. Like they were throwing a football and they were just like, you know, laughing when it was just, I was like, wow, that's great. And I walked down to the edge of Waikiki and I walked back. And by the time I had got back, like 10 minutes, there was a police cruiser on the grass and they were arresting one of the guys. And so I walk over there because I'm just curious, like how did that go from playing football and having, like just tossing a football and having fun to this guy being arrested and shouting going on? And what I gathered from the other guys there was that the sign says that you can't throw balls in the park.
Which in itself is a problem.
So this local guy that lives here, from here, is throwing a ball in the park, and somehow a police cruiser comes up on the grass and asks him for his identification, and he refused. And so it gets into escalates, and they arrest him for refusing to show identification. And I don't know, it's my perspective and my personal opinion that I believe in more freedom of the right to do and be whatever. And if you're throwing a ball in the park, whether it's against the rules or not, it's not justification for police intervention or nor for ID. That's just from my opinion, my thoughts on it. And I get it's complicated, you know. I get that there's complicated things. But anyway, so I'm looking at it and I'm like, I just asked the officer, I was like, really, you're going to arrest this man for throwing a football? You got because, and I was like, you wouldn't arrest him if it was a white tourist. And then this other man walks over to me. Well, first off, this Australian guy comes and walks over to me and he's like just telling me that you're not allowed to check IDs. And I think he said he was from Sydney. He said, you're not allowed to check them. It's weird that happened. And then this other guy walks over to me and he starts just chastising me, like, why you got to make it about race and blah, 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 blah. Stop harassing the police. And I was like, hey, look, first of all, I'm not saying that he was arrested because he was dark skinned. I'm saying he wouldn't have been arrested if he wasn't. That's the first thing. And second of all, like just what I said, I don't think that you should be able to intervene at all when it comes to like somebody throwing a football in a park. They definitely wouldn't have done it as a tourist. And so then the other Hawaiian guy comes over and talks to me again, and he's like, you know that the guy's over here, he's a cop too. And so this guy in plain clothes was over here pretending to be an innocent bystander talking to me, but he was actually a cop. And I gathered more information that both of the cops, both the plainclothes cop and the other cop knew those guys. And so I would guess that plainclothes cop called the police and said that called the cops and said that those guys are over there throwing a ball.
Well, the guys told you, right, that they've been bothered by them before.
Yeah. So I don't know. And so I'm sitting here thinking, how does a local person get arrested in Honolulu, Hawaii for throwing a football and not providing ID? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I've lived here, spent many years in Honolulu. I could do just about anything I want and the police are not going to do anything to me. But then why them? And if it's not about race, then what is it about?
Well, we were talking about yesterday how there's a big emphasis on consumerism here, especially in Waikiki with the tourism, and so they weren't consuming anything; they were just living their lives. And to be policed for that is, it's scary. It really is. But I mean, I'm glad that you said something, and you even went back and talked to those guys, the local guys, after that, right?
Yeah, I went back and talked story for them. I feel that was the best I can do. I feel helpless in those situations because there's really no way for me to do anything at all other than get arrested. And that doesn't serve anybody. I can't stop his arrest. I can't do anything. And so I just feel like it's a power and control thing, you know? It's taking advantage of those. Let me add something. That these men looked poor. You know, I don't want to make too many assumptions, but I assume that they don't have much. And it's just taking advantage of people that have no power to resist in any way, shape, or form. And it's also, I believe, like a misuse of public money and funds and services, because what are they going to do to him? If he doesn't have any money, what are they going to do? Take him to the jail and arrest him for no ID, and they're just going to let him out? He can't,
It's a waste of time. And like Nico said, there's that feeling of trying to keep locals away from this area. But yeah, I appreciate too, Nico, that he said something.
So yeah, I mean, we got to get back to, when it comes to policing, I'm all about supporting police and you know, good policing systems and whatever. But we've got to find a way back to community policing, you know, where you know the police in your area. And I guess those guys did know the police in their area.
Yeah, they
so
did.
That doesn't quite solve it.
That didn't
But they
help.
probably weren't from the same communities.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's move on from that. I was glad to talk about that.
Yeah, it's important.
You know, again, I just feel like helpless in some situations, but I also feel a moral obligation to do something sometime. And then let's move over to other more conflicting, or let's say topics that can be difficult to talk about right now. And that is what's happening in Palestine. And Alicia and I have both grown on this significantly because it's so far removed from us. It's hard for us to conceptualize and understand. Like I've spent most of my life in Utah, Alaska, and Hawaii. And so none of those places have, you know, very big populations of Jewish people or Muslim people. There's some, and I've known some, but I have not been, it's not been a big part of my life or anything like that. And the same goes for you for the most part. And so when it all happened, it was kind of like, oh, it's going on, and I don't want to say anything because I don't really know what the right thing to say is. And then I brought it up on the podcast a couple times as it was evolving, and I talked to Daniel Mate about it, Gabor Mate's son, and then I talked to Hawai'i Shakur about it, and then I think I can't remember, Vicki Reynolds, a social work activist from Canada, and we were talking about it, and I got a ton of emails, like not a ton, but like 5 emails from different people that were like, just saying that, you know, that we're completely wrong about everything, and we need to get our shit straight and whatnot. And I've had a hard time doing that. And so I want to circle this back to like the obligation of, as a human being, but also as a social worker, to pay attention to things like this and to try to understand them the best that we can. And like we mentioned that earlier, right, that we're all about peace, right?
Right.
That's what I believe in, peace. And so I want to state clearly, like, my thought process through this is like, so was it October 7th? October 7th, the Hamas attack? That's not very peaceful. And so obviously I don't agree with that, and I don't condone that and whatnot. But I also don't agree with the response of, you know, I don't even know how many people at this point, tens of thousands, killed civilians. And so I've been trying to learn more about it, and I picked up a book. I picked up 2 books from the library, one from Norm Finkelstein and one from, how's his name? Alan Dershowitz, Opposite Sides. They hate each other. They're both Jewish, so I figured it would be good. But I haven't got to the Dershowitz book yet, but the one by Norm Finkelstein, it's written in like 2017, so before this current situation. But when reading it, it's like the exact same thing. And it's like really troublesome because like everyone's villainized if you talk about it in any certain kind of way. And like I'm reading about like, I just want to tell you the stuff that I'm reading about in here from the reports from like the United Nations that these prints in here, like that when there's somebody from Hamas in say like a house, and if there's a building in the way, that it's justified to shoot through the building.
Well, you should say if there is a considered terrorist in
Hamas, that's what I'm saying, Hamas terrorist, then they could blow through the building to get to the terrorist. And I don't know about that, but I'm not down with all that. And I see some of the images and whatnot from what's happening, and I see some of the numbers, and that shit is crazy. And I feel that I don't feel like, you know, everybody needs to go and say, I'm taking a side right now and need to do exactly this. I think I don't agree with that part of social media and whatnot, where, I mean, you should take a stand if you strongly believe in something. But what we should do, what I believe we are obligated as social workers, is to pay attention and to learn more and to continue learning and to realize no matter how much we think because certainly people know more than me, but however much we know, we don't know it all, and we need to continue to learn more.
Yeah.
How have you evolved on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know I don't know a lot about it, and I know when we first started talking about it, it was really hard for me. I was really burnt out from work, and I felt like I couldn't take in any more kind of trauma. It was bothering me a lot, and then I pushed past that a little bit because I did feel like, and we spoke about it a lot, there's a responsibility I had to know what was happening and what was going on. So I took care of myself, and then I was able to learn more about it. But so I still don't know a lot. And the history, I'm starting to learn more about how this is just repeating itself over and over again. And one key thing I think is, I don't believe as humanity we can move forward and progress if we just keep having division. And so I agree, it's important to kind of take a stance, but to take sides, I think, is just unhelpful too. Because, yeah, like you said, peace over war is something I push for a lot, generally within ourselves, but within the world. And we can't do that if we keep taking sides and keep staying divided. And I think the powers that be that push these wars want us to be divided, because if we're divided, then we're going to keep having conflict with ourselves. If we become together as one, then we're going to be a much more powerful humanity, and we're going to heal, we're going to move forward, we're going to progress. But if we just keep staying divided, we're not going to be able to do that. And so I think it's our responsibility to know what's happening, to learn about the history of it, but also to not get caught up in taking sides. Like, there's people all over in both lands that are hurt, and there seems to be it seems to be kind of outbalanced and a lot of violence towards one side right now. But still, I think there needs to be more peace over war. And I think what really hurts me is, what was it, where America and the UK, was that in the United Nations, when they both, for the ceasefire?
Yeah, that was the UN.
The UN, yeah. Where I think it was the UK.
A couple times.
They didn't, right? They didn't choose.
I believe that the first time it came up, I could be wrong, but I believe the first time both the UK and the United States voted against it, and then the second time the US was the only one, and the UK abstained. Maybe that happened twice, but
there has to be
I think it's changed now. The US has abstained.
Okay, but yeah, the ceasefire, I feel like, if there's a ceasefire, it's peace for both. And so, yeah, and like I said, I don't know everything, and so I'm talking from a naive standpoint, but there's so many lives that are being hurt, and especially innocent lives, children, that I care about.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, again, there's so many different ways to look at it, but I believe that as humans and as social workers, we have a responsibility to pay attention and do the best that we can to learn. And just to throw a bone, I think those in my class have probably watched it, but the movie Omar from Palestine, it came out in like 2013 or something, but it gives a good window into what life might be like in Gaza and some of the tactics used. And it's a great film.
Yeah, that taught me a lot. I really did.
And I just wanted to mention one more thing regarding like the wars that we're involved in and the conflicts in the world. And another reason why I feel personally obligated to like be involved at this point is because if you step back and you look at it, I work for the university, which is through the state of Alaska. I pay taxes they take it straight out of my check and they send it to the United States government. Well, the United States government buys weapons and they send them all around the world. So it's literally my money that is getting
They're funding it.
Spent to buy weapons. And so, I don't know. I have my little brother who actually stayed with us in Alaska for a little while. He was looking for something in life, and he joined the military. And he's in the Army, in the, what are they called? paratroopers or something. But so he could be sent out as well at any moment. And, I really don't want to know what that would do to him to have to go in to some kind of, let alone death or whatever, PTSD, those kind of things. And so I'm also personally vested that way. But I don't believe in the distribution of weapons all over the world continuously by the United States of America. We represent ourselves as a place of peace, as a place of moral superiority. How could that be true if we arm the world with weapons all the time? Pablo Escobar has a quote. I may have mentioned this on the podcast before, but he said, something along the lines of, Americans like to look at us Colombian drug dealers they call them narcos, as being so bad or whatnot. But consider these two facts. Colombians don't use cocaine, not on the level that you guys do, and it's cheap and freely available. There's no profit. And the other fact is that Colombians don't make guns. The United States makes guns, so they use all the drugs. The United States uses the drugs and they make the guns. So who's really to blame? And I'm not saying that Pablo Escobar don't have no blame. I'm just saying that it's more complicated than that, right? And United States needs somebody, or we need a revolution to where we can be a peaceful society somehow, in my opinion. That's what I would like to see. How does it feel to you being in America do you consider yourself a foreigner now? What do you consider yourself? How do you look at the United States?
It's funny because when I was growing up, the United States to me, I only saw it through like reality TV and movies. And so it was kind of like this glamorized place. I first went to America from the UK when I think I was 13. And I remember myself, my parents and my brother were like, oh my goodness, everything's so big. All the hotels are bigger, all the buildings are bigger, the cars are bigger. Everyone has a pickup truck, but they don't have anything in the back of the truck. They just have a pickup truck and now we have one. But everything was just so big. And I think in my 13-year-old self, I felt like big was better and like it was just this powerful country. And moving here, it was eye-opening because one, race is considered very differently here. I feel like there's so much more division with race and it's spoken about so much more here. And I don't so much think in a positive way. That stood out for me a lot. And it's been eye-opening working in the social work field, especially in America, and learning about the systems that just don't work. And I'm not saying the systems in the UK are any better. It's just very different because obviously we have the National Health Service, so healthcare is free. That part is very different. And coming here where it's privatized insurance companies and working in the social work field, it's a business. Social work is a business here, and in the UK, it's not. It's what was the individual you had on previously who was explaining in social work in England, you're working for the state, but people go to get social work services for free. You don't have to use insurance.
Abid.
Yeah. So it's just very different. Everything is for profit here, it seems, and the legal side of it as well, litigation and being in social work and having to be worried about the potentiality of being sued is not something I would have ever thought about before I came to America. So it's different. It's very different. But I don't know what I consider myself. It's a good question. Again, I just a human in this world, but yeah.
One of the things I hear from black people from like the United Kingdom and Europe and basically outside the United States is that, and other people, but especially black people, is that when they come to the United States and they talk to people, that they're surprised at how much everyone is obsessed with race.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because let's talk about anti-racism for a minute. So I believe in being anti-racist. I mean, I don't have to talk about it much to show the racism that's been present historically throughout since the conception and before and now. But anti-racism, is asks you to look at it and call it all out, and it also asks us to look at race with everything. And I believe that race is a social or a power construct, meaning it was constructed by humans for reasons of power to manipulate over others. So a lot of people think that racism would be like people, I don't like you because you're black, or I don't like you, and so I create racist ideas. But really, I think racist ideas got created because people needed to justify enslaving other people and abusing them. And so, like, you're reading about the history of the UK, right? They had a hell of a time convincing the people to stand up against slavery in Jamaica and whatnot. And this was the time before, phones or internet, so they were riding horses all around the country, showing them pictures of slave boats and stuff, right? And so they needed to make people look at black people and indigenous people and others as inferior, as less than humans, so that they could justify getting the sugar on their table that the slaves made in Jamaica and wherever else. And so they created the race as we see it, and that's obviously, you talk to folks from Africa. I don't mean African Americans born here, but people that born and raised in Africa, they don't see like as everybody as kin always just because they're black.
Right.
There's a lot of different tribal stuff going on, and they see different ethnicities within. And so that's something that we kind of constructed over here in the West. And we expect everybody else to live by that and to always talk about it. And so to me, the fallacy of anti-racism, what I've come to believe at this point in time, and my beliefs are still evolving, is that the problem is that you're trying to get away, we're admitting that race is a construct that we made up. And so we have to like be aware of it, and we have to look at it, because it does affect people. Even if we made it up, then it still does affect people. And there are differences culturally not between all, like, exclusively, but there is in some ways. But it's like a snake eating its own tail. If all we're noticing is race from the beginning, then how could we ever get away from it? And it's a double-edged sword, because it is important, and it is important, many black people are going to have a very different experience than I would in the United States of America. And so it's important to be aware of it. But again, I believe that those things we made that up. And so we're continuing to adhere to that, and we're going to get to this world where everybody's only defined. And, like, even when you talk about Martin Luther King Jr., his most famous speech is like talking about he dreams about the day when, the color of our skin matters no more than the color of our eyes, and what's important is the content of our character. But it can't be that way if the first thing we're looking at is race.
Right.
In all circumstances. The content of the character goes away, and you're expected to adhere a certain way. And I think this as a white guy, I try to, obviously my students know, and like, I try to incorporate worldly beliefs and worldly things. I try to learn more so that I can create my own culture, so I'm not just taking on something that I didn't have anything to do with.
Yeah.
But that can be complicated in today's world, because I've been chastised by that as well for, like, going out of my place, if that makes sense. But is that my place? Born as a white guy, and that's just what I am? And what does that even mean? It's really messy.
Right. It is. And you were making me think, because when I came here and they would refer to me as African American, and that it was so confusing to me, because I was like, one, I'm not American, and I'd honestly never considered myself African at that point. And so it was so confusing to me. And I also felt like, because I've always grown up, I'm mixed race. My mom is white, Caucasian. My dad is black Jamaican, but lived in England most of his life. So I've always considered myself mixed race, Jamaican, Caucasian. And so the African American identity put on me, I felt like it was kind of pushing like hate on my white side, if that makes sense. Like, to just say that doesn't exist, like, I am African American. It goes back to slave days, I feel, is, if you have like black blood in you, then you're black, and that was a negative thing. And both being mixed race, I don't feel like is a negative thing. And so completely saying that I am just African American or black it just didn't make sense to me. And I feel like it just encourages a lot of self-hate, and it is a social construct, and it's just unnecessary. But it's different for everybody. And I think it also goes back to everybody, we're all human, we all have our own stories, and we all see our culture and race and identity in different ways. And the only way that you're going to learn about how someone else feels is to listen to them. That's with our clients, that's with just being humans in this world, right? Is to just listen. But is it okay if I answer one of these questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and understanding that everybody doesn't fit into the slots that society creates for them. You check the boxes. Everybody doesn't fit cleanly into those things, both in the way that they think and the literally what they are. Like I think about our kids, you know, and what would they check?
Yeah.
And I wish they didn't have to check nothing. Human being.
Human, right?
Check.
Yeah, other, human. But there was really good points about when we were talking about division and, you know, taking the side of the marginalized over the colonized and never the colonizers. And agreed. I mean, the power imbalance there is huge, you know, but I also go back to, and I challenge everybody, on any side, there is a history and there's story and there's human beings, right? And so there's trauma on, you know, the behavior someone's coming with. There's trauma probably going back decades and decades, centuries and centuries. And so I still think it's important to listen and learn about every human's history, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward. And I totally agree that we, you know, standing with the marginalized and placing our energy there and, you know, helping people live in, you know, equitably is super important. But I stick by that division is never gonna, it's not gonna be the means to this peaceful end or life. I know there's no kind of linear end, but we need to be united, you know, union with yoga as well, you know, union of the mind and body, but union of humanity. We need to get away from division. And Jazz said, with like these bigger situations, how to reconcile these groups to achieve that kind of unity. And again, like with talking circles, and we talk about it all the time, of just gathering together and listening to each other is key. Because if there was just more time to sit and dialogue and hear people from all different backgrounds, people that you may, you know, first off, you may have experience with that has created hate or division, but to just sit in that circle and to just be patiently listening to everybody, you can't say that wouldn't help unify people. And you'd be like, I didn't know about that about that person. Oh, I didn't realize that. You know, I think that is how we achieve that kind of unity. And I know that it's easier said than done. And that's not going to be how we have a ceasefire in Gaza. You know, it's just not going to happen because, you know, the powers that be
It might be.
don't work in that way.
Think about this. All these politicians that are always talking about everything and, you know, this and that. What if they were required to sit in front of us and participate in a talking circle about how they felt about things? Like talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, Hamas, Joe Biden. Like imagine that. It's hard to imagine because it would never, ever, ever, ever,
That's
ever,
when
ever,
it's just
ever
not
happen.
going to happen.
But that's where the revolution will start, is in a talking circle.
Yeah.
By us talking to each other and listening to each other. Most of all, listening to each other.
Yeah.
That talking circles played a huge part in revolutionizing my mind. And,
Right.
I think this too, you know, to respond more to Jazz's comment, you know, Paulo Freire would say that we start the revolution by amongst ourselves, and especially the oppressed. We're all oppressed to some degree, some more than others, but the not elite, that we liberate ourselves, and through doing that, we would liberate the oppressors, because although the oppressors could be some real nasty mofos, let's leave it at that, they are imprisoned by their own ideology. And the only way to free them of that, I agree with Paulo Freire, would be, you know, for the oppressors to free themselves. Many people have talked about it, you know, Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Many people have said it, you got to free your mind. And that's where it starts, I think, is individually, collectively. Why don't you talk about that, the circle of self?
Yeah. That's what was coming to my mind. With revolutionary yoga therapy, and I haven't been able to do this on a big scale yet. I do this with some clients that I work with, but this vision I have of gathering people together and meeting in a circle, you know, to ground ourselves, to create intentions, and then to go forth in a yoga practice where we're finding union of the mind, the body, the spirit, but also that energy in person, you know, unifying the energy. And then after that yoga practice, that yoga asana practice, we sit in a circle again, we practice pranayama, breath work, and then we have a talking circle, and we talk about different things, whether it be peace over war, or whether it be trauma, or different kind of themes. And we've gone through, we've been able to regulate ourselves. We've unified the energy kind of in the space that we're working in. And then we dialogue by listening to each other on our thoughts and our feelings and things that have come up through that yoga asana practice. And I feel like that's how we create that individual higher consciousness, but all that collective unity and collective consciousness. And then you go forth out of that group and you spread that to the other people that you're going to interact with, and they spread that again. And so that's that vision I have of creating these gatherings where we can practice movement of the breath, of the mind, of the body, union of the mind, body, spirit, but also collectively. And then it's like a ripple effect. It just ripples out and out and out. So that's the vision that I have.
I just wanted to say that we could start a ripple this summer. If somebody has a recommendation for a park that people would come to, we'll facilitate something.
We'll be there. Yeah.
Pass that information on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just had that thought.
No, yeah, for sure. Let us know. Because I think it's really important, especially in this time. Like a lot of people are so disconnected from themselves, and so finding that union within yourself and then union within the group is super important. And like Monique says, a virtual one, which I would be down for. I also think that there's so much power in that, rooted in person, that both would be really, really beneficial. You have a question?
I was going to say that there are a lot of comments and some questions. I know we missed one that was asking you to talk about working with folks organic.
Yeah.
Simone, I think maybe if you want to go through these questions and kind of unpack some of them, that would be a good use of the time. And also, if any of you wanted to call in, now would be the time. I'm not saying we'll end right at 11:30 or Hawaii time, 1:30 Alaska time. We're going to try to finish around there, but we can go a little bit over if we have to. But so now if you want to talk about something, now's the time. But go ahead and unpack those questions.
Yeah, Simone, I keep meaning to come back to your question. So Simone said, can you talk more about working with people more organically? I find myself naturally working that way as peer support at an addiction recovery center. My supervisor is very clinical and always trying to correct me. I'm there for the clients, so I meet them where they're at, but worry about upsetting my boss. And I think we all experience that, and I feel that as well as a supervisor, right? Because I have people above me that want me to push these certain policies and rules and ways of doing things that I don't always agree with. And so I'm very honest with the people I work with the interns I work with and the other clinicians. And to have a conversation, again, I probably sound like a broken record, but to just listen to what they're coming with. And they may have these awesome ideas that I've never thought about that don't fit in the traditional system or process, but I'm such an advocate for why not? Let's try it. And so I push the boundaries a little bit, but working organically, with the clients I work with too, I think is important. And again, going back to not pathologizing everything. In the work I do, we have to have at least one diagnosis to then bill their insurance and get them enrolled in services and do a treatment plan and keep going with therapy. And so I try and keep it really simple. And I use PTSD a lot because I think a lot comes from trauma. And if they're exhibiting, kind of hypervigilance and they're having, they're having trouble regulating their emotions, they're being triggered by these certain things, and you could kind of go from there and diagnose everything in the DSM-5, because you could probably find something for everything. But I try and keep it really simple and then work with them as human beings. What's coming up, with CBT, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not one for kind of using a lot of worksheets in that, but I think CBT in itself is a very powerful tool. And someone will come to me and be like, oh, my doctor said we should do CBT. And I'm like, yeah, we've been doing CBT for 2 years. I've been challenging your thoughts. And I'm like, oh yeah. I've been challenging, hey, where is that thought coming from? And when you think oh my God, my day is going to be so crap, how does that make you feel in your body? And then if you probably well, it makes me feel crap. I feel really down. And then, so how do you go about your day? Well, I just kind of sit in the dark. I don't open my curtains, things like that. That's how I organically practice CBT. Again, with like yoga, kind of including that with my clients and with the clinicians too, is finding ways that it makes sense for people. So I'll talk to clinicians about, before a therapy session, before you step out and go get your client, or you turn on that video conferencing, do a few extended exhales. Regulate your own nervous system. Inhale for like 4 and then exhale for at least 5. So organically, I'm just trying to include some, yogic philosophies that I think are really powerful in my work, but in their work as well. And so I think it is hard to balance that and not upsetting your boss. But to know that if you trust your gut, if your gut feeling is saying, I am doing good work with this individual, then you have to kind of balance the certain policies that you have to follow with the organization you're working in. But the most important thing is, are you there for your client, and are you helping your client with whatever they're coming with? So I feel like I took a tangent there, but hopefully that answered some of what you were asking for. Let's see, what else was in here? I know there was another question. Nat's down for yoga Saturday at the beach. Oh, Kahala.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be it's like the first day of your new life, if it's who I think it is.
Natalia, is that you? I think it is. We could do that.
That's part of the reason why we're here. Our friends are getting married.
Yep, we cannot wait. And you're right about people want to be so evidence-based when evidence-based is white. And yeah, because so what is evidence-based? It's what's funded and who's funding that, And so that's another thing of including more yogic philosophies in a treatment plan. If it was just that, some insurances don't reimburse the company, the organization for it. And so you have to get creative. And I do. I put it under mindfulness. Mindfulness is always talked about now. Psychosomatic therapy. You have to be creative, and in some ways you have to work the system that we're working in, because always go back to, okay, we're working in this organization, we have these policies and procedures, but at our core, we're social workers. We're there for the human beings that are in front of us. So that's the primary focus. And then, okay, how can we make this fit, in the processes that we have to? And so documentation-wise is not the most important thing to me. I work with the clients. I know I do good work, and my documentation is what it is. And it doesn't say everything that we do in the room, because insurance might not completely reimburse for that. But I know it's powerful. It may not be evidence-based, but I know it's helped people.
What do you think about, I was going to read something right now.
Oh, sorry.
What do you think about what we've talked about in the past about, and I noticed this when I was first working with kids, right? This is back in the days we had to write in the charts. It wasn't on the computer yet. But, it goes from when the child arrives, right? They have a name. They're a human being with a history and a family and a story. And then in the notes, they get reduced to a number, and not even sometimes you don't refer to them. You're not allowed to refer to them by their name, so you refer them to client or resident. And even that, they short to like CT for client or RT for resident. And I understand why you're doing it to shorten it. But think about the dehumanizing part of it. I used to work for my graduate practicum, I did it at a methadone clinic. And it really used to bother me how they would sit there and talk about these people like they were a number. They'd only just talk about them with the number. And I'm like, how can you just talk about 1714?
Yeah.
Like, his name is Hector.
Right. It's totally dehumanizing.
He's a person, but that's how they talked about it. And so what do you think about that in social work? Do you still see that going on? And have you changed? Have you found any way to?
Yeah. I definitely still see it going on, but I would say the clinical supervisors I work with within the consortium I work in are amazing. And I notice everybody is very careful of how we talk about people, and we talk about people, and we try not to be like this client and and talking from a human level rather than this kind of system level. So I do appreciate that. I know the clinical supervisors I work with are trying to do really great work within the system we're in. And I remember you pointed out, you were looking at something I was writing one time. I think it was way back in practicum. And it was like the CLT for client and DX for diagnosis. And I've really made a change in that because I think language is powerful. And after reading also, was it 1984, where it talks about like how, language and what we say, and we're going to lose all of that and things are going to be changed. And I think it's important that we talk human language and we refer to people as they are rather than client 1714. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not healing.
Okay, wifey.
God. He has never called me that before.
I never would.
That sounds weird.
Not my vocabulary. Not to hate on people that do use it. You keep going away from
Oh,
this
I'm
comment.
sorry.
So Haley wrote a comment. I'm just going to read it real quick. She says, social work definitely is busy here. Most of my family has worked in social work. Right now, my sister works for a program that helps traumatized teens and young adults become, quote, functional members of society. I like that. I'm glad you quoted that. They can get kicked out over stupid stuff. It can be difficult when you don't have the resources necessary to help someone that needs help, or you can't help the kids because they were kicked out over something fixable. And I just thought we could touch on that for just a minute because it's been a while since I've been working directly with folks that aren't students. But, I think about how another way that I felt helpless working with kids is that, no matter what, they were going to have to go somewhere else, whether that was at home, where if most kids, I shouldn't say all, but many kids that ended up in treatment, obviously have those problems that originate in the place that they came from, the home, the neighborhood,
The environment.
Environment. So they get sent back to the same environment that they came from. And that's helpless, right? I can't do anything. I'm not a wealthy man. I can't adopt them. I wouldn't even be legal. So there's another weird thing about the world today. To me, in my opinion, and people would disagree with this, but it would make sense for someone in a social worker or someone in a similar role to adopt a child that didn't have a family, that needed somewhere, and that they had connected with through work. But that would be highly scrutinized at this point in time. And I've never even actually thought about that, like with a specific person, but it does make sense to me more than somebody paying a lot of money to have a lawyer set them up with an adoption.
Well, if you remember my other practicum supervisor, James, he has, I think, maybe like 10 kids he's adopted from the work he does.
They were from there?
Yeah.
Oh,
From
cool.
Yeah. And so he saw that. I've had amazing supervisors over the time I've been in social work, but...
What do you do how do you navigate that? Because you work with a lot of people, right? And you see them, what's the average hour a week or something like that? See somebody for an hour a week. There's only so much you can do within those. I mean, you're on a computer screen, so there's only so much that you can do. And oftentimes, those people got to be dealing with some real world shit. They got to go out there and they have bills to pay. They've got abusive partners. They've got abusive parents. They've got bullies at school. They got all sorts of stuff that they got to go to. Do you ever feel helpless? Like I'm doing a good job as the therapist, but I really wish I could help this person.
So helpless, so helpless, and so many people that I work with are like, this 1 hour a week is so important to me. Like I wait for this 1 hour a week, and I wish I could do more. And I'm sure all of you know, working in the field, there's only so much we can do. And so I try and offer, I have a mindful movement group where we do yoga and breath work. And so I can offer different things. So I know we meet individually this time, but come to my group and we can hang out in the group too. And I think just because you become that safe person, and someone explained to me, let me see if I can articulate it well, that when the people that we work with, they have trouble regulating their emotions, we become that kind of regulated emotion for them. We kind of guide them through that. And hopefully we become that kind of voice in their head for a while when they're out of the session, and then it becomes their own voice over time. And that's what we're, trying to empower. So it's not just we're not just enabling them to feel like that they are only going to be helped if they're seeing me, because that's not helpful either. I never want someone to feel like that 1 hour a week is the only way they're going to survive. But at the beginning, it may feel like that. So, I'm sorry, what was the initial question? I forgot.
Just do you ever struggle, with...
feeling helpless. Yeah. And so, incredibly, you feel very helpless. And I always try and leave people at the end of session with something something positive, like a strength I've seen, and also something that they can continue working on. Not necessarily homework, but I'm like, hey, practice that forward fold. Remember, if you put your head below your heart, that triggers that nervous system, that parasympathetic, and then that's just that reminder for them. And also then it's kind of that voice in their head, and it starts that process of me being that voice and then themselves being that voice. But it's helpless. It really is. We can only do what we can do. And I think also that's how we get burnt out, is if, we feel helpless, and so we push ourselves to the limit, but then we burn ourselves out, and then we're no good to the people we're trying to help. So we have to be careful about that.
I think too, social work, how I always often talk about how I feel like it's over professionalized and tries to slot you in somewhere. Well, sometimes your role or your slot as a social worker, you having feelings as a human being interferes with that, and they talk a lot about that in transference and countertransference and all that. We haven't really talked about it in my courses yet, but I don't know that I agree with all of it so much. I think that you're supposed to be a human being, and if you hear a story that identifies with your own troubled things, you ought to identify with it in some way. And I mean, you shouldn't just like react, emotionally to it, but you ought to, and that is a way that you might be able to connect with said individual. But a lot of people would disagree with me.
Yeah. Boundaries is a big thing, right, that's talked about. I think that's a hard one, because I do think we're not robots in the therapy room, and we never should be. And if someone says something that, I'm like, oh yeah, I went there, but like some people would say, no, like don't keep all of your own personal experiences to yourself and like just focus on the client, but the person that's in front of you. But then that takes away the human level completely. So I think there's such a big place for being human in the therapy room. But also, I do think we have to be careful of letting all boundaries go, because then it also affects the healing for that individual. If there is that transference and they're seeing you as, I can't even think, maybe like a mother figure, but that's been something of conflict. There's a part of healing in that, but it can go a little too far sometimes where it's not helpful, And so it's finding that nice spot, which is different for everybody, of being human and sharing human connections and being on that level, but also knowing that we are responsible to have a little bit of boundary in terms of, is it going to negatively impact the other person, And it happens, I'm sure you saw it in treatment centers, it happens where there's sexual relationships between individuals, and that can be really unhelpful when someone's in a power, that there's more power there with someone else who doesn't, and then that gets used against them, like things like that.
Yeah, it's funny though, because when I was thinking about at the treatment center I used to work with, there was 2 times I had a right-hand man that I was the supervisor and that helped me with everything, and I trusted them with everything. And 2 of those people ended up having relationships with children. And when I heard both of them at the first, I was like, there's no way. It couldn't have happened. But it was funny because I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about the girl, both of these men had a relationship with the same girl.
Oh.
And when you said about power, I think she had a hell of a lot of power over them in a different way. We talk about power imbalances, but she had the mojo. She knew how to manipulate things to her way of being, and that's how.
Right.
Those men actually should have used their power in a better way.
Well, and also, I think that just brings me to, then it's so important to help her use that power, put that into energy that is really positive. And I'm not saying like relationships or, that way couldn't be positive, but she had a lot of power that she could probably do amazing things in the world.
Yeah, a lot of those, I'd say a good 75% of the most troubled youth that I've worked with are extremely talented individuals
and resilient.
In a variety of ways.
The resilience too.
So it's not like they don't have the skills to be successful people. They've had things that have burdened them and traumatized them and whatnot.
Jazz has a a good question here. So Jazz recently returned from the Alaska Just Transition Summit, and it was amazing. She had a lot of trouble with the continued usage or suggestions for enhancing change within the existing system because it hasn't been working. Right, as social workers, how do you balance trying to disrupt that while maintaining a necessary degree of involvement? That is such a hard one. And because I think it's almost impossible to change the system from within the system. I think there's too much power on the outside to completely change it. And so we always talk about like, well, we're trying to revolutionize with our own kind of practice and, but it's still in the system, right? We're still working at the university, still working within a large health consortium for myself right now. So I don't have a great answer for that because it's hard to balance. I do what I can. And I always go back to, finding unity and love, just pushing unity and love through everything. And hopefully that can like shine bright in whatever work I do and it can ripple out. But I still do believe, I don't know if we can completely change the system from within. I think we have to create something different.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's no easy answer.
No.
I work at the university, and it makes me think of a meme that I bring up all the time. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it's like, had a picture of a white professor, and he's like, white professor thinks he's part of the resistance. He supports the university, the Democrats, and I can't remember what else, but he basically supported everything in that regard. And so I have to...
And to survive, like
Yeah.
like Jazz says, like we have to survive. We have to make money and feed our kids and pay the rent, right? Like, so completely just walking away from the system is difficult.
Yeah, well, but I think it's a little easier for me to answer it because I have almost 100% autonomy as a professor, and even more so if I was ever able to get to a tenure, which I'm working on, then I'd have complete freedom, and they're not able to fire me for anything. But I infuse it in my curriculum. I rarely just use a textbook, and I think the textbook is more like marginalized in my class. Like I really don't. I will use one because it contains, but many of them contain a lot of useful information, like an encyclopedia almost. But I believe that the learning happens elsewhere, and I try to infuse my courses with everything that I can with a revolutionary spirit. And I mean not just like revolutionary social work, but I mean like diverse sources, not just even like with race and ethnicity and culturally, but also in the ways of thinking, diversity of thought. And I hope that shows up in the classes I do. That's why some people complain, that I put too much in my courses. But I do that so that people have options and they can find what resonates with them or where they need to go. Because everybody doesn't need the same thing, nor do they want the same thing. So I try to do that. And then the other side of it is, I think, is at home in our own personal communities and in ourself, the circle of self you talk about. Well, at the center of that would be, like my heart, maybe you'd say. And I'd say that I try to do the very best I can. As imperfect as I am, I'm a person with a lot of idiosyncrasies. I had a really troubled life growing up, and so it affects me in a number of ways. And if you knew what was going on in my mind, a lot of the time you'd be like, whoa, I don't want to go back there again. But anyways, I think that through trying to change myself and become a better person and continuously evolve and know that while I may know some things, I really know nothing in the big scheme of things. And I need to continue to learn. So I think it goes there. But then I also think, some people, and I think especially indigenous folks and stuff, really got it right when looking at, like say, how to become a good ancestor, for example, or looking beyond my life and whatnot. And that can be hard because we have things that we're dealing with that are pressing right now. We want change. But I think that I truly believe that the best way that I can change the world is through my children and like bringing children up that think in a different way, that are, ready to live. And because this future, who knows what's going to happen in the future. And so I feel like the best way that I can do it is intergenerationally. And lots of indigenous folks, but especially Native American peoples, really had it right looking at, 6 generations, is what you should be looking at. And do we look at that as capitalist Americans? Hell no. It's all about making the profit right now at all costs, whatever, instead of looking at like, well, how are my great-great-grandkids going to look at me as an ancestor? Are they going to be proud of what they did? Are they going to be happy with the things that I passed on to them? Or are they not? and use that to change the world. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that goes with like the ripple effect too, right? Like if our kids have this message in, around them all the time, and they pass that on to their kids, and it's that ripple effect. And we, like Haley said, optimistic for the future, and she's in the internal audit department, and she wants to make a change there, and through actions and words, like all of that is so powerful and important, and we can do that. This stuff the love that we can share in the work that we do, wherever we are within the system, outside the system, it's important. And I'm optimistic too. I think if we can live through unity and love, we can get to a better future. Sorry, our kiddos you may be able to hear them in the background. They've done so good. But yeah, if we can push more unity, more love, more peace, wherever we are, to the people we're around, and that ripples out after that, I'm optimistic too, and I have a lot of hope for that. And Christian briefly mentioned the circle of self. I didn't talk about it too much, but it's kind of the foundation of how I encourage people, again, any people that I come across, interact with, is things like move your body, move your mind, but also find stillness. There's movement and stillness in movement, so balancing both. Be mindful of the nourishment that we put in, drinking a lot of water, eating as many kind of whole foods that we can, just nourishing our bodies, peace over war, love for ourselves, love for everybody else around us. What else is in there? I think they're the main ones, but movement, stillness, nourishment, love are really big components of it. And so I think if we can all push that, we can have a brighter future.
We can have a brighter future if we go give our kids some attention.
I know. I just heard that they've done pretty good.
No, I'd say that's a good indicator that we're good parents, that we could get 90 minutes in a hotel and that they can control themselves long enough.
We played a lot.
Do it respectfully.
We played a lot at the beach this morning, so they got their movement in.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're rolling to the end.
Next time, why did you not have a class trip to Hawaii?
You know what, David? If I could swing that, I would be the first guy to do it. Do you know when I taught in Hawaii, every semester we had class on the beach. And I got in trouble for that, but I still did it. I didn't care. Said, you're not supposed to do it. You got to have it in the classroom. It's like, no, we're going to go do talking circles at the beach.
We're in Hawaii.
Anyways, we got to go. I got one last question for you, and we were going to talk about revolutionary social work, and I still think we need to unpack that maybe at another time. But what does it mean to you? What does it mean for you as a clinical therapist right now? What does that mean for you to be a revolutionary social worker?
It means a radical shift in myself, the people I work with, away from pathologizing things and getting back to a human level. And again, unity and love. That's a big thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody tuning in and for all the participation in the chat and calling in. It always makes each and every episode so much better when we have the participation. I love hearing from you all, and I just thank you for your contribution. And thank you to my beautiful wife. It's a good time for me to suck up to you and make you feel good in front of everybody, in front of the audience. No, but for real, if you would know how much this woman has grown since the day that I met her, now being like a yoga master, basically, and I don't even want to go into it, but like she wasn't there when we met in that regard in a number of ways. And so when I look at you and I see how you've grown as a woman, as a human being, as a social worker, like I just want to say that I respect you. Even outside of my wife, I respect who you are and the person that you are. And thank you for coming on the show and sharing that with everybody that's tuning in.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And like I said, always evolving. I've evolved a lot, I've grown a lot, but I've still got a long ways to go. We're all lifelong learners, so we should all remember that too.
All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you next time. This episode was recorded live on Tuesday, April 9th, 2024, in Honolulu, Hawaii. This episode featured Alicia Stettler, and it was hosted by Christian Ace Stettler. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work. This has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. All right, everybody, until next time, keep being revolutionary. Peace.